Hello and welcome to this talk on prehistoric rock art in Scotland. My name is Linda Bjerketvedt and I am the data analyst for Scotland's rock art project, SCRAP for short. In this presentation, I will offer an overview of the work SCRAP has been doing in the last 4 years and explore some recent results of the data analysis carried out to the large dataset. There are over 3,000 rock art sites currently known in Scotland, making it one of the country's most prolific prehistoric monument types. The project has enriched and revised Scotland's prehistoric rock art, allowing us to better understand connectivity and cultural transmission of the rock art tradition in Western Europe during the Neolithic and Bronze Age. Scotland's rock art project is the first major research project focusing on prehistoric rock art in Scotland. It is a 5-year programme working with local communities across the country to record, research and raise awareness of Scotland's prehistoric rock carvings. All the rock art records created during this project, including the 3D models, were co-produced with local community groups and individuals, so-called community teams. The project is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and hosted by Historic Environment Scotland. We work in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh and the School of Simulation and Visualisation of Glasgow School of Art. Our project partners are Kilmartin Museum, Archaeology Scotland, and the North of Scotland Archaeological Society. As you may all probably know, prehistoric rock art in Scotland is also known as Atlantic rock art, a tradition that can be found in other parts of Western Europe, such as England, Iberia, and Ireland. Its iconography is mostly composed of geometric and abstract designs, of which the cup marks and cup and rings, which are small circular halos surrounded by concentric circles, are probably the best known. In Scotland, this rock art can be found in various parts of the country, with large concentrations in the south, in the west, and parts of central Scotland. One of the main objectives of the project has been the construction and maintenance of an extensive database combining up-to-date information from Canmore, regional historic environment records, private archives, and new finds. In the last 4 years, in collaboration with our community teams, we have reviewed and documented in detail more than 1,500 of these panels across the country, which you can see as red on the map on the right. We concluded that 15% of the recorded panels are not rock art, but natural features, which can sometimes be mistaken for cup marks. A further 20% of the sites investigated were not located or had been lost or destroyed. So overall, we currently have detailed records and 3D models for almost 1,000 confirmed rock art panels. The dataset encompasses a high level of detail and therefore provides a powerful research tool for ourselves and others. Although the prehistoric rock art has been known in Scotland since the 19th century and many research projects have been undertaken, there are still several unanswered questions about this carving tradition. One of the main questions that we need to address is chronology. When was prehistoric rock art created in Scotland and how did it change through time? We are working to offer a more refined period for the creation, use, and abandonment of rock art, and also define an interval of time in which to place the rock art. This enables us to include it in the wider narrative of prehistory. We are also redefining and updating the character of prehistoric rock art in Scotland according to the finds and results of our research. One of the main aims is to understand the regional distribution and why it is so uneven, with high concentrations of rock art in some places and virtually no rock art in others. This also links with how rock art reached the Scottish territory. What is the relationship between that moment and the distribution of rock art in Scotland? Lastly, we want to know who created the rock art and what was it for? This is a very difficult and perhaps impossible question to answer, but nevertheless we will be approaching it by trying to better understand the social, cultural, and physical context in which the rock art was created and used. In our research, we are using a multi-scalar approach, which addresses some of the unanswered questions mentioned previously and provides a holistic understanding of the rock art. We are looking at different scales, such as the detail of the carved motifs, so the small scale, the type of rock selected for the carving, the medium scale, and the landscape in which the panels are located, the large scale. Our methodology is very flexible and allows us to work relationally, utilizing several categories and variables and zooming in and out of the different scales. Exploring the relationships between the different components of the rock art and its context offers very exciting opportunities to approach Scotland's rock art in a different way. The rock art is being classified according to a detailed categorical scheme, and this graphic shows a more detailed breakdown of the variables we are addressing. At a small scale, the categories focus on the morphology of the motifs and their making, the shape of the images, their structure, the grooves, and carving techniques. The use of 3D digital recording technology is very important in this process because it enables us to look at very fine details of the carvings. At a medium scale, the rocks are classified according to the physical characteristics of the rock media, such as the type, the shape, color, textures, but also the composition of the motifs and their organization on the rock surface, the relationship of the motifs with natural features such as fissures or hollows, and how the designs are structured amongst themselves, if they're converging, superimposed, or connected by intricate lines. Finally, at a large scale, we are looking at patterns of landscape settings. For example, the relationship between the rock art with natural elements such as slope, aspect, geology, and watercourses. We are also assessing visibility and other spatial relations with contemporary archaeological monuments. For this talk, I will be mostly focusing on the medium and landscape scale of analysis. I have been specifically addressing the spatial analysis to the landscape using GIS software, R, which is a free software environment for statistical computing, and Excel. On the right, you see an overview of the case study areas we have been working on so far. We are approaching the spatial analysis case study by case study, so we're looking at specific geographic areas and the rock art within them. So far, we have outlined 7 case study areas amounting to around 420 panels. These are areas where the data collection had been concluded at the end of last year, and therefore they were ready for analysis. But we will expand with further case studies, which I have marked with the black dots here. So we're going to be having 2 further samples from Loch Tay, as well as 2 further samples from Dumfries and Galloway, 2 samples from Inverness, and from Angus and Aberdeenshire. To illustrate our approach, the potential of our methodology, and some of the results we are achieving, I will be focusing on one of the case studies that we have recently worked on, Over Glennie and Nether Glennie in Port of Menteith. These groups of carvings are located just north of Lake of Menteith in Stirlingshire at the edge of the Trossachs, and you can see from the maps on both the left and the right. They appear on either side of the Glennie Burn, which runs down between the ridges towards the Lake of Menteith. In our analysis, we have been focusing on a specific group of panels, a total of 46 in situ sites, which you can see as red dots on the right map. We have only considered panels that have been recorded and validated by scrap, and obviously then identified as rock art in the landscape. So we're excluding any monuments and other carvings that may have been taken out of context. The landscape upon which the rock art is located is marked by long, narrow, and prominent parallel ridges, with scrub filled near vertical gullies cut into the steep outer slopes. The ridges are highly visible and become important landmarks in the area, as you can see from the photos taken in the field. It is in this geological framework, with bare rock and linear bands of crags and screes occurring on the sheer upper slopes, that we find most of the carved rock. As you can see from this map, the spatial proximity of the carved rocks to the Highland Boundary Fault is striking. The Highland Boundary Fault is a major fault zone separating the highlands from the lowlands. It's an area of great topographic change, and it also marks a geological division in the area. The local geology within which the Over Glennie and Nether Glennie panels are located is sandstone mixed with conglomerate, siltstone, and mudstone. But to the north, we have samite and pellite, which are also metasedimentary rocks like the sandstone, but much finer and older. Out of the 46 panels in this group, 3 are slabs, 2 are potentially glacial erratics and of another geology than the bedrock, but all the panels are more or less natural outcrops. The geological background in which the rocks are located may have a greater implication in the selection of the media to carve. In fact, when we approach the rock art from a medium-scale perspective, we see that there is a very strong relationship between the motifs and the microtopography of the rock surface. The interplay between the motifs and the rock surface was classified in the categories of structural and behavior variants of our categorical scheme. Here we have assessed this relationship as well as the relationship between the motifs themselves. The graph on the left shows the different types of natural variants that we define and which are featured on the panels. The use of fissures to divide and enclose the motifs is quite common and is present in almost half of the panels in Netherglennie and Overglennie. A quarter of the panels also include fissures truncating the motifs. And natural depressions in solution holes are also often incorporated into the composition, sometimes even transformed into motifs themselves. These features and behaviours can be identified in most regions of Scotland, as you can see in this chart, which is a presence and absence of each of the variants that we defined and identified. This characteristics of the rock can be found in areas where the rock art is considered to be more complex, such as Dumfries and Galloway, Argyll, Perthshire, but also in regions where the majority of rock art is composed of simpler motifs, such as cut marks. This is, for example, the case in the Highlands. We see this relationship particularly in the way fissures and cracks are used to deliberately truncate motifs or organize them on the panel, creating divisions and delimitations. Interestingly, they are also often found being used as radial lines, resulting in a hybrid motif of natural and human-made characteristics. But the incorporation of geological features can take on other forms. Edges can act as limits to the composition or shape the external part of the motifs. Convexities of the rocks can be used to create motifs that have a real three-dimensional character, which you can see at the bottom left corner with our example from Glasgow in Perthshire. The way the motifs interact with each other and the natural features suggest in many ways that the artists may have predefined their designs. The way that natural features are utilized within Atlantic rock art is in fact intrinsic to this carving tradition. There is quite clearly a relationship between motifs and the microtopography, and that rock art is very reactive to the natural features of the rock. In terms of other environmental variables, we looked at slope, aspect, soil type, and land use. In Port of Menteith, 41 of 46 sites fall within peaty podsols, with a small number of carved rocks located in humus iron podsols. Both of these podsols are quite acidic and nutrient deficient, although humus podsols can be improved for agriculture. They also support productive forestry plantations and vegetation communities such as heather moorland, which is reflected in the current land use. Almost all carved rocks are located in areas where current land use is of rough grazing, and one panel is found in an area of modern pine plantation. In medieval and post-medieval times, the area would have been used for agriculture and settlement. To aid interpretation, we have reclassified slope according to Butzer's classification, which takes into account environmental and ecological factors in determining hilltop profiles. As you can see, the panels are located in areas that avoid very steep or flat terrains, but are preferentially placed in medium or accentuated slopes. These differences can have implications in the type of activities that were carried out in the environments of the rock art. In terms of aspect, the terrain is largely oriented towards the south and southeast, the same direction where Lake of Menteith lies. This is thought to be mostly due to the characteristics of the terrain itself, and instead of actually being a deliberate choice. We are applying the same variables to the study of the other case studies mentioned before. We are finding that actually the rock art does share certain preferences. One such preference is the dominance of medium slope within rock art locations. We see it in all the other areas in Kilmartin, in Cairnholy, in Faifley and in Tiree, apart from in Mid-Loch Tay where accentuated slopes are more prominent. It is interesting that we are seeing this same preference in an upland area such as Port of Menteith, as well as in a flatter area such as the island of Tiree. This island is quite low-lying and open with extensive and sustained views. In terms of the slope of the terrain, most of the island is soft smooth, which means a slope of 2 to 5%. Comparatively, the majority of the panels on Tiree are found within medium slopes. It does not mean that medium slopes are preferred for the same reasons across Scotland when it comes to rock art location. In fact, it could have no significance at all. And this is why, as we are progressing with our analysis in the next few months, we will be testing for significance using statistical methods to better understand intentionality and One of the things we have focused on quite extensively in our analysis is visibility. Because visibility has been emphasized as an important facet of Atlantic rock art, it has become an almost integral feature of rock art research. Rock art is often found in quite spectacular landscapes across Scotland, and some offer very extensive views over the surrounding areas. For Netherglenny and Overglenny, this is certainly the case. We have some very impressive views towards the south, which features the Campsie Fells, Gargunnock Hills, and Fintry Hills in the back. If we want to capture this visibility in a more objective and quantitative way, we can use viewshed analysis in GIS. A viewshed is essentially a calculation of the area that is visible from a location. You can modify the algorithms in several ways. You can add an observation height, a target height, or a radius that limits the extent of the viewshed. If you add single viewsheds generated for single points altogether, you get a cumulative viewshed, which is what you can see on the left. The cumulative viewshed allows you to see how many sites, or observers in this case, share the same area of visibility. Here I've calculated it for Port of Menteith. The areas that are yellow are seen by between 40 and 45 sites, so that's basically most of the panels. Respectively, the dark blue areas are seen by 1 to 10 panels, so the least. At a smaller scale, the visibility is oriented towards the prominent parallel ridges in the northeast. This is expectable because this is the affordance of the terrain. But at a larger, wider scale, the cumulative viewsheds are focused on the south and the southwest. The narrow area we see is almost acting as a corridor, where the largest number of rocks are looking towards. This focus on a visibility towards the south seems deliberate. But what is being viewed? Viewshed analysis tends to highlight prominent landmarks, but it can also highlight other important features in the landscape. In this case, the left part of this corridor overlaps with the Flanders Moss, a raised bog rich for environmental resources. Flanders Moss lies to the southwest and southeast of Lake of Menteith, within the Carse of Forth, the low-lying floodplain of the Forth estuary. Flanders Moss was formed over 8,000 years ago and remained mostly unchanged. So how did people in the Neolithic and early Bronze Age interact with this important resource for flora and fauna? And how did the rock art panels nearby relate to this prehistoric human activity? Interestingly, there are antiquarian accounts of wooden tracks preserved within and across the moss, reminiscent of other wooden tracks from the Neolithic, Bronze, and Iron Age in Britain. In 1999, AOC Archaeology, funded by Historic Scotland, excavated a small wooden platform which was radiocarbon dated to the early Neolithic, just where the pin on the map is showing. It was suggested that this platform acted as a preparation area for hunting and gathering that took place across the fen and the salt marshes at the time. If the panels were created at the same time as people were exploiting Flanders Moss, and furthermore, when they were building and using this infrastructure across the bogland, what purpose does the rock art panels serve? We can think of it in terms of movement between these different areas, all contributing to the configuration of the landscape in prehistory. Our next step in analysis is therefore to see whether mobility patterns derived from computational methods, such as least cost path analysis, can help us understand interactions and purpose better. This is something we are indeed looking at for all the case studies. We are at a stage where we are getting a better understanding of the character of rock art. Now we need to look closer at similarities and differences. Here we have another cumulative viewshed, this time for the Kilmartin, Kilmichael, Glacier and Cairnban area in Argyll. So this area has 92 rock art sites in situ. The visibility in this area is in many ways more restricted and intimate than what we saw in Port of Menteith. Due to the nature of the topography, it is limited to the narrow glens and valley floors. A closer look at the intervisibility at a very small scale shows that small groups and pairs of panels are visually connected, meaning that many panels will appear visually isolated at a larger scale. The extensive and far-reaching views seem to be restricted to a selected few sites, particularly the more coastal panels. The direction of visibility is obviously largely determined by the landscape, but how does it relate to the movement through the landscape? The viewsheds may highlight areas of accessibility, routes and navigational markers. The next step is therefore to combine all the information we have about rock art, visibility, mobility, and contemporary archaeological evidence to look for correlation. Thinking about the research questions I set out to start, we don't have clear and definite answers to these questions yet, but we are definitely at a point in our research where we can begin to unravel some aspects of the rock art. It is, for example, very hard to date, but recent research has placed it within the Neolithic and Early Bronze Age. At this point, the rock art was being created outdoors and has a clear relationship with the landscape as it is attached to one place. It is worth highlighting that our research has a clear influence from landscape archaeology, which was brought to rock art studies in the 1980s, mainly by the hand of Richard Bradley. Our study is both investigating this relationship, but also deconstructing certain assumptions that are automatically assumed to be important for the rock art location. As such, we are looking at these variables individually to then bring them together to create a more comprehensive picture of the rock art, its use, and its social and cultural role. Our dataset is starting to show that there are regional preferences, but also some characteristics of the rock art are repeated across the whole country, such as the incorporation of the natural features in the design. This provides a coherent character to the rock art. One of the main things we have been looking at is visibility, which needs to be deconstructed. Many of the panels that we are looking at are flush with the ground. They have relatively small motifs that would have been visible only at certain parts of the day and perhaps coming from specific directions. However, in the case of Port of Menteith, as a group, they do seem to be focused on a very specific part of the landscape, namely Flanders Moss, a raised bog which was unchanged for thousands of years and very rich for environmental resources. Now we need to look at how the rock art may have related to other activities in the landscape and how rock art fits within the Neolithic and Bronze Age narrative in Scotland. Thank you for listening, and if you want to know more about the project or get in touch, you can find all the details on this slide.